Hi friends, I'm Ashley and welcome to Darling Cottage Diary, where I hope to inspire you to document and correspond through paper and analog means while also making it beautiful and elegant. If you like that sort of thing, you should stick around and subscribe. I make new videos every week, and if you'd like to support me in other ways, you can find affiliate links below and my shop at darlingcottagediary.com. Now on to today's video topic, how a commonplace book saves you from doom scrolling. Obviously, I am a proponent of diaries and scrapbooks and all kinds of journals and letter writing and just documenting our lives on paper because I am still pretty young, but I've been around long enough to see the birth of the internet and a lot of things having turned digital. And I can tell you I've lost a lot of memories through digital means, and a lot of times I have felt this underlying current that things in the digital realm can sometimes feel really empty, and I could never put my finger on it until I read a chapter of the book The Imagination Muscle by Albert Reed, and we'll get more to that later in the video. But doom scrolling, for those who don't know, is a modern term for sitting on your phone, zoning out, and scrolling on whatever social media platform you've chosen to be on. This is very common to do. A lot of people do it before bed. Sometimes people do it, before work. I work with kids. I see kids doing it a whole lot in my day job, and it's something that social media has been designed to do. Give us ways to get a dopamine kind of high in our brain, which creates something of an addiction. I'm sure, at least most of us, have heard the studies and have heard all of that. And I am not here, first of all, disclaimer, I am not here to shame anybody about social media, about scrolling, about anything like that. I do it every day. It's how I get my news. It's how I connect with friends and family, friends I've made only online. I get inspiration for artwork. I get inspiration for recipes. I am not here to vilify is the word. Not here to vilify anything in our digital age. My goal here is, if you are unhappy with your screen time, if you feel anxious when you get off, if you feel more tired and drained than you did when you sat down to scroll, even if you're looking at positive content, I find that if I do it too long, there are diminishing returns. Because of the comparison is the thief of joy trap, right? So I will sit and scroll through farming videos and beautiful candle making aesthetics and just anything on my channel. You can imagine a million avenues that I enjoy watching. And oftentimes I will get off and look around at my house, realize that I need to clean something, I need to do all of these other things in my real life, and compared to these spick and span things I see online, as well as just other beautiful things, which I appreciate in the moment, it can often trigger feelings of inadequacy, or like I could have something better and I don't, and I know I'm not the only one to do that. And so journaling was a way for me to get home from a busy day at work and do something where I felt recharged at the end of it, emotionally, because a lot of times I could also be more tired, but in a satisfied way, like when you finish doing the dishes, you feel better. But I actually enjoy the act of journaling instead of doing the dishes. I actually really hate that. But anyway, so journaling in general, I think, is a wonderful way to avoid the doom scroll trap. And using a commonplace book is what you need if you are a person who doesn't always know what to write, if you are somebody who is uncomfortable writing about, if you're uncomfortable writing about yourself or your emotions, or if maybe you only want to write about your emotions some days, but you still want to journal and write in other days, maybe you really like art journaling, but some days you don't have the mental capacity to art journal because there is a certain level of needing to feel relaxed and recharged in other ways that we don't always get, especially for those of us who work, 6 to 4, 9 to 5 type of jobs outside of the home. And so I wanted to talk about commonplacing, which I've already done a few videos on, and they tend to be some of my more popular videos, so I think I'm going to do more of them. But this type of journal has been used for centuries by entrepreneurs and artists and inventors and scientists as a way to document in observations, document other things that they've learned, document all kinds of things about the external world. It's less about what's going on inside your own brain, your own soul, your own body, and it's more about your perspective of how you see things in the world or information that you learn that you do not want to forget. And that is where I know that personally I've lost a lot in the digital age. Some time ago, I'm going to say in the fog between 2013 and 2016, when I had 2 little babies under 2, and I would kind of sit and read articles and everything on my phone. I would read books on my phone, just in between like little downtime when they were napping or whatever, when I needed a minute to myself. And I remember an article coming out that talked about digital literacy, and not in the way of being able to sort through biased information. It was more about the actual retention of how a person can remember and process information when they're reading on a blue light screen versus a physical book or like an ink back type of book, digital book, and like an e-reader. That's what those are. You can tell I use an e-reader. So, and there's a really big difference in how all of the participants process these things. And I found it to be true for myself, and I'll try to find the article, but it talked about how there's something about the screen that makes your brain filter and scan less carefully. With a book, you tend to read it more slowly, you tend to absorb the information better, and I don't know if that has to do with people and articles online being written either by AI, so there's a lot of like repetition to try to, make the internet algorithm pick up that website, or if it's because of the light itself or what it was. They didn't postulate the cause of it. They just said that people were better on average at retaining and remembering things from reading on paper or an inky reader. And that got me thinking about, what about writing? Because I know that when I'm writing about things with my handwriting, and those thoughts are going out through my hand with a pen, and I can see my handwriting and everything, I retain it better and I process it better, especially if I'm writing about emotional things or if I'm taking notes. I am not a person who can take, like in college, I couldn't take notes on a laptop. I forgot everything. So I would just cover spiral notebooks and write in the margins and doodle, and like there are all of these. It's like my brain just got spilled onto the page, and there's a lack of that for me on a laptop. And I was not somebody who could take notes, and even writing papers, oftentimes I would have to write the broad strokes at least on paper and then transfer it to digital means. And again, I don't know if that's just my brain with the writing side of it, but since most people are that way with reading, I'm going to make an educated guess and say that that's pretty similar for writing for most people. And so with commonplacing, you're able to take the things that you learn and observe and put them in one place. And then you can use the John Locke Index like I do. I'll link the video showing how I set mine up and how all of that works, like explaining how that works in the description box below as well as above. But I wanted to do this page on kind of the how to observe chapter of the book I mentioned at the beginning of this video called The Imagination Muscle by Albert Reed. And he's got very elegant prose in how he writes. And so it's all highlighted like crazy. There were so many wonderful, profound quotes in just this one chapter. He was able to put a lot of things that I think I've intuitively felt for a long time, but never had the scientific data nor the language to describe how I felt about a lot of these things. So I tried to collate a lot of the points, and that's what I'm writing here about how to observe, quote unquote. So the first thing I wrote was that he said, observation is a state of mind that applies in equal measure to the scientist, the entrepreneur, and the artist. And he goes on to describe T.M.W. Turner, a British artist who, among other eccentric things, strapped himself to the top of a mast with a belt of a ship during a storm, and then painted his observations later, and everyone dismissed it as this just mess of a canvas, when in actuality it took, just like Van Gogh and Monet and all of these other more modern artists, it's very impressionistic in how he painted, but it was what he was feeling and seeing while being strapped to the mast of this ship during this 4-hour storm. And when you see it from that frame, the whole picture makes sense. And it's really a fascinating thought on the level some people will go to observe something properly. And I would venture to guess people, who do like method acting or very similar, anything in that line of work would be similar. And he says about Turner reveals something that Da Vinci had only hinted at without perhaps knowing it himself, that there is another layer of human experience and consciousness beneath external reality. And he goes on to talk about this as observational closure, and said, I had no sketchbook, the author's now talking about being on a beautiful bridge while he was on vacation. And he said, I had no sketchbook to attempt to capture its shimmering vitality, nor did I sit in a nearby cafe to note in words its bewitching effects on my mind. Observational closure slows the mind to a more reflective rhythm. And he goes on to talk about how people who, especially like naturalists, who sit and observe flowers and plants and animals and weather, are particularly good at this. And that observational closure is really important so that we can fully experience our lives, essentially. We can fully experience and remember these things and make them important to ourselves by attaching that observation filtered through our own emotion onto paper or onto whatever other medium, sculpture, whatever, music, whatever medium, art medium is your favorite. And so he goes on to kind of talk about photography, and specifically because photography is something we all have such easy access to in the digital age. We can take a picture of anything. And the issue is that photographers, people who are using observational closure, will look at a certain angle. They'll take the light into account. They will use, there is an emotion evoked through it. It's not just a blank snapshot of whatever they're looking at, because that's not observational closure. There is no emotion attached to it. It is a copy of something. And about this, he said, this is not to be confused with other more recent, more prevalent form of photography, whereby recording becomes an alibi for truly seeing, the experience diminished in the moment and in memory, and then going on to also talk about selfies. He had some particularly scathing ideas. He says, where the mirrored screen replaces the lake of Narcissus, registering with the universe, not some form of observational closure, but more a silent plea to be observed. Now, personally, I don't view selfies that scathingly. I also don't take very many selfies at all, for the same reasons a lot of people don't. But if you're on vacation or you're out to dinner with your man, or you're playing, you're out somewhere for ice cream with your kids, or you're out enjoying something and you're taking photos of what you're doing, I think selfies are an important way to not only track what you look like as you age, which is an interesting thing to watch, but it's also a way to, I don't know, just remember the moment, just like any other images. I think he's more talking about the selfies where you sit and you take what you think is the best angle of yourself just to seek the validation online of where you're going to show it to people. Because even artists' self-portraits historically were quite humble, and a lot of artists, I mean, look at Van Gogh. There was no flourish, there was no amelioration. He wanted to paint himself the way he thought he looked. And that's quite different from a lot of people who do modern selfies. So that is, I think, what the author was talking about. And he goes on to, there was a whole side note of like scientific information that I have to put on another page because I was running out of room, and I kind of wanted this page to just be about observational closure in and of itself. But he was talking about the James Webb telescope that launched in December 25th, 2021. And they have what's called a near-infrared spectrum cameras that kind of act like dominoes, like domino windows opening and shutting, that can make hundreds and hundreds of observations in parallel and over time. They will observe hundreds of galaxies and detecting traces of activity from just after the creation of the known universe about 13.8 billion years ago, and discover more about the origins of cathedral-like spiraled galaxies and black holes appearing as luminous peaks and cliff ranges of far-off galaxies. And so just kind of talking about the spectrum of observation, it's completely naked to our human eye, our land telescopes. These are only observable with these special instruments, being not obscured by our ozone and our atmosphere, and compiling all of the data and translating it to the point where we can see it with our limited ocular retinas. So that was a cool little side note of scientifically our observational powers have become so incredible. And you also think about things like the microscope and how, through our technology, we've become so observational. It's fascinating. And so the final notes he wanted to talk about involved I think, a cautionary tale about technology also. Is we have all of these wonderful things about it, but we also have some things we need to keep in mind. He said, we observe through the lens of media, nudged by sway of algorithm devised by an unaccountable force. We, in turn, become the observed as unwitting parts of behavioral data sets. In our delegation of activity of observation, we might more carefully calibrate the danger in doing so, small errors compounded taking us in misleading directions, where human intuition is asked to yield unquestioningly to the impermeable shield of technological authority. And I feel like that's just really something succinctly said for us to keep in mind as we do traverse the digital age, I feel like a Commonplace book is a really good way to keep us grounded in information that we learn from others, but also the observations we have that are real and concrete to our perception. So I hope you enjoyed this little video, and it was a lot more chatty than usual. I will return to my normal quiet videos next week. If you enjoyed this, please put a little space emoji below and tell me about your favorite thing that you've ever used observational closure for, a trip, a photo, anything like that. I would love to hear. I hope you have a wonderful week, friends. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.